I'm a photographer, and I took this photo, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. All of these photos were taken on a Digicam, on an old school, early 2000s digital camera in the early 2000s. Some of these are from 2007, some of these are from 2009. I took these as a youngin' when I was first learning photography, and this was all I had access to. And I can still effectively turn them into Instagram bangers. And I'm gonna show you how in this video. I got a couple ways to show you that I think you're gonna like. I'm Addy, welcome to Analog Dreams. In this video, we're walking through how to edit some Digicam photos. This is a trend that has taken off in the past few months that admittedly I'm a little confused by, but I wanna support and show how you can take what would typically be just low-res, blurry stuff with lots of pixels and turn it into something that someone would actually wanna click on the old Instagram. So I have some photos I took in 2007 from one of our Daytona Beach vacations I took as a kid because my grandparents had a timeshare or something. This is what it looks like in Lightroom here. We're in Lightroom Classic, but this is what the actual size is. These photos are minuscule.
It's a tiny piece of paper. Okay, that's all it is. Tiny piece of paper.
Yeah, 1024 by 768. These are like computer screen resolutions for the old CRT days. And they are not particularly great. Admittedly, a lot of them just aren't great photos in general because, you know, I was learning, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just happy to be in a cool place, snapping little snapshots. But I wanted to challenge myself. I have access to a lot of tools that I want to show you that I can use, and I have learned a lot about photo editing in this time. So can we take these very low res, this one's 1216 by 912. It's so tiny. If we do zoom in a bit here, not only do we have the normal camera noise and stuff, but it's chunked into chunks because it's all pixelated and blocky. So what can we do with these? Well, we're going to use a combination of just good old-fashioned Lightroom editing, a new feature in Lightroom, as well as a couple extra plugins. And I'm going to show you some ways you may or may not have access to depending on what kind of tools you use. But first and foremost, we're going to pick one out. Like I said, I have some from a variety of different trips that I took when I was younger, and we're going to edit it up because I've already edited up a bunch. This is not a good photo, but it has potential. You know, you got a boat on a little river here. We were on, I don't know what I was doing. This one's kind of cool with the big sunrise. We will mark this one, and we'll go on and mark this one too. But again, these are super low res. This one's a bit higher res. I was using a different camera at this point. I think I still have this camera. This one's 1200 by 1600, which is not a low resolution, but you zoom in and it's garbage. But what I want to show you is if you're posting to something like, say, Instagram or something like that, or Glass, or, you know, pixel fed, it doesn't really matter as long as you can make it look good. Now, we are very limited here. This is a super compressed JPEG. We have no dynamic range to speak of, but we can make it look good. So I'm going to click on over to develop, and first and foremost, I want to straighten it out a little bit, get our horizon straight. So I'm going to use a little angle here. I don't even know what I want to reference for this. So I'm going to take it from like here, there, probably good. Yeah, the you know, I don't know my boats. The straight part of that boat is what we want to base it off of. All right, so we have straightened it. Before we do anything else, before we do any edits, because this will apply to the edits, I'm actually going to make the image higher resolution. Now, I've shown in plenty of videos at this point my various upscaling workflows for things like Topaz Labs, Photo AI, and Gigapixel. There's the new Chainer and a bunch of other of those, you know, other upscaler models that I can show you, that I showed you in my printing playlist link below. We're going to use one built into Lightroom. If you right click, there's an enhance button, like in the old TV shows. Zoom and enhance, zoom and enhance. And this uses Adobe Super Resolution and just creates a copy of the photo with double the resolution. Now we can hold it, we can see without enhance, with enhance. It's not gonna do amazing to like make up some detail, but what it does do is it helps clean up just some of the pixels. Because realistically, it's not magic. We're not gonna get something that never existed in this photo, but if we can make the details, especially the blown out details and the blurry details, look more like blurry or blown out details versus just raw pixels, the better the image is gonna turn out. You can also see we got some color fringing there we could deal with. So I'm gonna enhance, and this creates a stack in Lightroom, which just means it creates two copies that are associated with each other of the same image. So if we click on that, we've got number one, and you can see in the file name down here where it says what you have selected, we have one that's dash enhanced. And then we have the original, and it also makes it a DNG raw file instead of the JPEG. Now we could right click this, and we could click enhance again, and it's gonna tell us we can't do that. So you can't stack that capability, unfortunately. So that's fine. All right, so I'm gonna unfavorite the non-enhanced version. So we've already straightened it. We've now enhanced it. And that resolution is now 2400 by 3200, which is a bit more of a standard size. So we go over here to develop, and obviously there's no end of photo editing tutorials on here. I will admit, because I have access to paid asset libraries and things like that, that I am an addict of Lightroom presets, just because they are great starting points. And it's less about not doing the work, because I pretty much always go in and make tweaks, but it's about quickly getting, which is in theme with the AI art kind of theme of this channel for the most part, it's about quickly getting looks that you can decide on the direction you want to go in and then tweak from there. I think it's a very underrated part of your workflow, even though LUTs and Lightroom packs are everywhere, specifically because people dunk on them so much and are like, just edit your own photos, don't use presets. Presets are such a great starting point. So like, I have this 80s fan one, which I love using just for like vintage style photos. And then I have a 90s vibe one, which rarely do I find like appropriate, but that's kind of a sunset vibe we might want to go with. But they just help me like quickly demo a bunch of different styles, and then you can quickly, before, after. That one's not bad. I wish you could like favorite a couple per image so you can like cycle through the looks, or I guess you could do like a side comparison thing. That one might work. Some of them aren't going to work if you don't have a true raw image, which is fine. Yeah, I want something that actually looks like a romantic sunset. Ironically, I don't think I have a sunset pack, which I don't think I realized, but that's fine. Got some Polaroid looks. These I either got from Creative Market or from Envato Elements. That's where I'm sub to at the moment. All right, we're gonna come in here. It was the vintage pack. Yeah, that look. We're gonna start with that look. I like where that's going, and then we're gonna tweak it from there. Now, the first, I'm gonna show you what I do in Lightroom here, which is gonna be this workflow. I'm gonna show you a second tool that I use as a Lightroom plugin, and then I'm also gonna show you how I edit in a completely different program to get similar looks after we've done our Lightroom edit. So if you just want to use Lightroom, we have this kind of setup here. We can change our white balance a little bit. You can see here, because we don't have a whole lot of dynamic range or bit depth for this photo, we start getting banding based on pushing the colors. So you can see here how quickly we get banding based on the white balance. So I'm not going to push the white balance that far. I think about there is pretty good. We did gain a lot back by reducing those highlights, but you can see we still have a fair bit of clipping. So what I want to do is instead bring down exposure, push highlights back up a little bit so that's still a little blown out, because that's how it is in the image. And then we want to boost shadows a little bit to bring back the rest instead of cranking exposure. We're not going to get a ton out of it though. I mean, those shadows are completely crushed and gone. But we can do a little something like this, just trying to build an image so you can see a little bit of what's going on. Vibrance is super cranked up. That's part of where the bandings come from, but it contributes to the look that we want. Keeping saturation low is actually the call here. I was going to turn it up, but there's already so much color pumped into this. I think that's fine. There's a little bit of an S-curve applied here from that preset as well. All of that is honestly okay. Lens corrections, we could remove chromatic aberration. I don't think it's going to do much here. Yeah, that's not really, that's fine. I'm a fan of it, so I don't like removing it a whole bunch. But we have this nice little bright side to dark side. And then we can look at our curves. The blacks are like super reduced here for that gray washed out look. I'm actually going to bring it in a little bit. And do it about there. And then we can do some selective masking, anything like that, to kind of affect the image. So for example, it looks like the preset already went ahead and applied some specific masks, which is all right. What I want, actually, what happens? They're not very dramatic. I'm fine with it. I want to create a mask, and I want to see if it can select the subject, and that be the boat. I don't know that it's gonna... Oh, it did kind of detect it. That's great. Got some of this background, which is fine. We can subtract with a brush. We don't want that to be affected. Come in here. We are really scraping at pixels, but that's fine. We want to select this whole center bit. Oh, I'm subtracting. No, add. No! Add. There we go. And then back to subtract. That's good enough. All right, for this mask, I don't want to get too much haloing around it, which is those white lines that show up, but I do want to boost it just a little. Make the boat stand out ever so slightly. We're not going to do much. That's fine. As is, we could leave this edit. I could come back here to our global adjustments. Like, as is, this is probably a pretty good edit. I would be okay with it. But if I want to take it a step further and really make it look kind of more retro or vintage, I'm first going to turn off the noise grain or the film grain that this preset applied. And we're still going to have some compression artifacting. You want grain in these kinds of edits because you're going to kind of cover up some of the blocking, the artifacts, the pixelization. But I don't necessarily like the grain that Photoshop or that Lightroom has built in, honestly. But what I can do is right-click, edit in, and I am using a third-party tool called Dehancer. Now, I got put onto this. They reached out for me to review it for DaVinci Resolve to edit in for my videos. And I've been using it for my color grading ever since. And I ended up buying it for photo editing because I liked it so much. And so I typically don't use their presets. I will come in here and start messing with stuff manually. They do have film profiles. Since we've already applied a Lightroom preset, we're not going to use the film profiles, but the film emulation, I'm actually a huge fan of it, especially again for video when I shoot in RAW on my R5C and things like that. We've already done a look in Lightroom, so we're not going to mess with the film profiles, but it's a great film emulation kind of plugin. There's a bunch of different options. I'm a huge fan of it, especially since it's the same workflow for stills and video. It's a lot more comfortable for me to use, but they have some great tools specifically for dynamic range compression for film looks, as well as for halation and bloom. Halation is the process by which when you're shooting film, like when you're shooting with the film camera, light enters the lens, passes through the film, which is stored back here, which captures the image, but some of that light also bounces back off of the back that the film is pressed up against, and that hits the back of the film. And that creates this effect called halation, in which there's a little bit of typically red color seeped into the highlights and things like that, where the brightest parts kind of bounced back into the film, and you get a kind of bias of the film's color built into your look. Kind of a desirable look. That's some of the warmth and the vibe that people want from film photography, even if they don't know what it's called. And so it has a great effect for that. That is one of my favorite implementations of halation. And you can see here by default, it's really strong because it's not limited at all. They have a mask mode option here, so you can see specifically where it's being applied, which makes it a lot easier to see like what your settings are doing. So here I'm going to turn out the source limiter, which is going to limit what actually triggers the halation to happen. So we want it just kind of on the highlights, but you also want to, you know, based on the look that you want to fine tune where you want it to go. My only complaint about using Dehancer is, as is, you can't mask out. So like if I just want to apply it in a certain area because it keeps picking up highlights in another area, I can't do that here. Now, if you use it through normal Photoshop, you can of course apply the effect and then mask that layered version on top of the basic edit that you already did. Through the Lightroom workflow, it's a little annoying. So we can turn off mask mode. We just get that little extra glow of the reds back in where the highlights, which also helps separate our boat, separates the trees a little bit better, makes it feel a little bit more glowy. And then we can come in here with the bloom effect, which is just standard like light glow kind of bloom. Turn that on, and similar idea. Start limiting what triggers it. And all of these just get you closer to what that film look would be. And especially with this bright, overexposed, completely clipped highlight area, that little bit extra bloom help just kind of makes it feel more legit versus just a low dynamic range image that is blown out. And then you have control over how much it, you know, how wide it diffuses. If we go back to mask mode here, you can kind of see it versus like a very tight line area. I like using a ton of diffusion because that's the point for me. Make it nice, soft, and glow. You can amplify to just crank up that effect. Off, on. You can change how much it tries to recover your lights, which we don't have much to recover, so we can actually turn that down a bit. Overall impact, which is just like a global blend mode. And same thing with the halation. We can turn that down a little bit. Crank up the diffusion, which kind of softens it a bit. Off, on, off. This looks more, even with the Lightroom edit we did before, it still looks like a pretty sterile, like this was just a low-res crappy photo. It's all crunchy. Crunchy is what I would describe it, which is a lot of the early, whenever people complain about digital video or photos, that crunchy feel is what people complain about. This is what I'm talking about, where you have those extra pixels and that lack of dynamic range that just makes it feel like concrete versus like smooth blacktop pavement or something. I don't know this analogy. I don't know where it's going. But that helps with that. We still have a lot of that pixelization and artifacts, especially up here in the cloud gradient, to play with. And that is, of course, where their film grain effect comes in, and it can be a little too aggressive, but I do prefer it to Lightroom's implementation. It just feels a lot nicer, and you have a lot more control over it. And so I can come in here. You can make it a lot bigger, or you can increase the amount that is present, which, of course, then starts to look just like noise. You don't want noise. You just want grain. But a little bit of grain just to blend those details. It blends a lot of the pixelization and the low-res elements a little bit more together as well, which is really helpful. You can affect how much it is shown in the highlights, the shadows, the midtones. You can change like color representation of it. You get a lot of control here. You also have positive film grain you can use, which never looks good to me. I always go with negative. They do have an experimental digital one, which is more like RGB noise, which I'm glad that you have, you know, options, but not what I want. Now we get a better before, after. That helps, again, just kind of smooth it out, blur it out, smear it up a little bit, but in a way that actually looks pleasant. And then there's all sorts of actual film effects you can do. I'm going to mess with the film compression. We usually have a histogram meter down here. It doesn't, the UI for the in Resolve, it's wonderful. In the plugin for Photoshop and Lightroom is a little buggy on the visual side, but you can come in here and compress the highlights and the shadows to bring it down, which is important for my video workflow. And actually the expand is, the film compression isn't available on video, but the expand feature is. So you just kind of roll off the highlights a little more smoothly, which I love. And you can either crush the blacks or like make them super low contrasty. Honestly, the way it was is probably fine. You don't want to make it too dim, especially if you're printing. So yeah, I'm just gonna leave it off. But then you also have a print mode, which gives certain effects based on type of print. I usually use the Fujifilm one, which then does change the color and the exposure and stuff like that. So I gotta tweak it a little more. You can tweak a little bit of that white balance representation, which I dig. Tonal contrast. We're not gonna mess with it for this photo, again, since we already applied a whole look. But yeah, we got some film grain. We got halation and bloom, and you can add a vignette if you want. I love the vignette in this as well. It's a little wonky to work with, but if it's your kind of thing. And then okay. And it's gonna save it out to Lightroom. And every once in a while it bugs out and doesn't save and causes me a panic attack because I have to redo everything. But I'll show a little before and after. And I think it looks great. I'm gonna go ahead and show you the next method super quick, just to get halation and glow in a way that you wouldn't expect if you don't have Dehancer, but for whatever reason you have the studio version of Resolve. I know not everyone is going to have that. Resolve Studio is a $300 one-time purchase, but it's not a subscription like Adobe or anything like that. I use it to edit all my videos. This isn't an advertisement. I just wanted to show a cool workflow because they do have a halation effect. Resolve comes in a free and a paid studio option with the payment plan, or payment tier that I talked about. But most of what you'd want to do for video editing and things like that, it's totally fine in the free version. Certain effects like the new halation and stuff comes to studio, either first or just in general. So for this, I just completely typed into Lightroom, which is always a bad idea. We're gonna call our project photo edit. We're not going to mess with anything else. First, we're going to pick out our picture. Now, I know photo editing in a video editor is a cardinal sin to some people, but with Resolve, you can edit in your native picture's resolution. It supports RAW format for RAW color grading and is a industry-leading color grading tool and has been for a very long time if you want to do it that way. So it's something that I actually like to do, especially since I'm used to the workflow. Now, I had originally picked this one out. Honestly, this one is so strong and like glowy already that all we would need to do is enhance it and kind of just clean it up a little bit. So I'm not actually going to use this one. I'm going to pick out one more picture. Actually, I already had some picked out here. Have we messed with this one? We haven't. There's not much to this one. This isn't like a great subject or anything, but we can still mess with it. So first and foremost, again, we want to enhance. Click OK. Make sure we are on the enhanced one. I'm going to export it. I'm going to export as a DNG file. Full size preview, none of that really matters. Export. And then I'm going to bring that DNG into Resolve, because again, it supports most RAW formats. Drag that in. It does not like that RAW file. What if I... Okay. DNG is not the way to go. We're going to export as a TIFF. Given that Blackmagic's own cameras export in Cinema DNG, I don't know why that's happening, but it's fine. Doesn't matter. Go ahead, use a TIFF. Okay. So we're going to create a new timeline using selected clips. And for the resolution, we of course want the dimensions of that image, which Windows does not want to tell us, but 6144 by 4608. Frame rate doesn't matter because we're literally using a singular frame. Click create. Now we're going to go over to the color tab. Because again, we don't care about editing a timeline or a frame. We just need this picture. I'm going to turn off the clips view because we only have the one clip. And we can zoom in, do everything we want. Our effects are over here on the right. If you don't see them, click the effects button. It's going to have a bunch of different effects. So we can use the normal color grading tools here to do a grade to the image. So we got your lift, gamma, gain, shadows, midtones, highlights, and then overall brightness levels. If you want to push it into HDR, you got more fine tuning there. RGB mixers, tons of controls. You have curves, which is available here. You've got color warper if you need to push one color to another. This goes on and on. You've got power windows if you want to mask out specific areas and apply effects. You can do a lot. So we're going to do a quick little standard color grade here. And I do recommend turning on scopes, and then I use the waveform the most, which allows me to see whether it's clipping in one direction or another. And you can use, if you have the Dehancer plugin for Resolve, you could use it here, but I don't. I didn't need to buy it for Lightroom. Whatever, it's fine. So for this one, I'm actually going to go for a kind of oversaturated, but not on the greens. Hue versus saturation. We're gonna select our green here. We're gonna desaturate the hell out of our green. Same thing on luminance. I'm gonna go for like an overly punchy kind of 90s color grade. Not like you would expect from, say, a 90s camera, but just like that style of just overly contrasty. But I'm also gonna limit it so that it's not clipping in either direction, which is just gonna give us something that pops like crazy. All right, so all of this is happening on what's called a node. You can toggle that over here on the right, nodes. Resolve is a node-based workflow instead of a layer-based workflow. They're very similar. Photoshop and most programs you probably use are layers, which just mean effects stack on top of each other. Nodes work similarly, but it's all like in a lossless space, and you can make nodes route to other nodes and a whole out of the scope of this video. But effectively, for major effects, you want to hit Alt-S and make new nodes and apply them on different nodes so you can turn them off and preview the effects that it has and be able to tweak them as you want. We can dive into all that totally separately, but I'm going to search the effects, There's a halation effect. I'm going to drag that onto node 2. We're going to zoom in here. We can see here in the brighter parts, we're getting that red in there. We turn it off. Also adds a little bit of glow to the details, which is going to help because we made it super contrasty. Those blacks in those areas are looking a little crunchy. This will help smooth it out. This is a little not great looking. I don't like the built-in halation effect compared to Dehancer. I prefer Dehancer, which is why I use it for my videos. But I wanted to show you both. Again, you have your threshold, which is how much, how bright effectively a certain part has to get before the halation kicks in. Film saturation level, you can really just like melt your view there. I don't want that super high at all. You have view isolated regions, which is going to kind of be like the mask mode. Although, that's like a very cool posterization look on its own. And then you have control over the strength of the reflections and all that stuff. So you get a ton of fine-tuned controls. I can increase the spread. Secondary glow, we definitely want, that way you don't have to use another glow effect, although you could come in here, add in the resolve glow effect, but we don't need it because it's built in here. And you can change the color for that as well. So we can add like a little bit of a light blue teal glow. And you can get crazy if you want to turn it into something wild. But we just want a little bit of it. Big spread, little strength. You can apply film grain here as well. I'm not sure I would, honestly. Okay, view glow alone is more like the mask mode. Reduce highlights. Oh, there we go. So, off, on. Again, we don't want to go nuts with it. Detail loss just as a global blur filter. That's hilarious. Aspect ratio controls what direction the glows go in. So you can have it be like all the way vertical or all the way horizontal. That's looking pretty good. And then we can come over here, delete the glow effect. We want grain. There's a built-in resolve film grain texture. Has different film grain presets. 35 mil, 16 mil, 8 millimeter gets pretty gnarly. Opacity, just crank that up. You can view grain only so you can see what you're working with. 16 mil is what we want. Texture, you can kind of see it, but since it's such a bright image, you're not going to see a ton of it. But you just want a little there, again, to mess with the little digital crunchy details. There's the strength of it, because the way Resolve does it compared to other plugins is it's basically a PNG file with an overlay filter, which is fine. All right. And then from there, if we wanted to get wild, you could add any number of like dust and scratches overlay, light leaks, things like that. That's what I use for some of these. So I'm just going to drag in some random ones. It's not going to make sense for this picture, but that's fine. And of course you can do this in Photoshop. I'm just showing you here. We've got heavy dust and hair. Sure, why not? And then right click, add tracks. We're going to add 3 video tracks above the video. I'm gonna add dust number 1, and then we're gonna go to inspector and retime and scaling and fill. Nope, fill it in, and then composite mode would be screen for these black JPEG images. Same thing with this one. Fill, screen, fill, screen. And then you can start reducing the opacity of any individual given one. Or apply a blur or something, because some of the pre-made ones you get are really sharp. And then here's the before and after. Again, this photo itself isn't anything special, so it's not too crazy, but you get the idea. You can take these Digicam photos, which still gives you the advantage of having something you just carry with you and take pictures on the go that slips in your bag or your pocket and helps you be in the moment and has the retro vibe. So when you're taking, say, like portraits with friends or something, you still get just the basic default vintage look. But then you can take them, and when you do capture something cool, instead of, which is what always happens to me, instead of just being like, well, damn, I wish I took that on my big camera because this was a cool moment, you can still turn it into something worth posting on Glass or Instagram or something. Hope you enjoyed. Remember to be kind, rewind, and I'll see you next time.